So it seems like all we do now in Washington is cover deadlines pretty much. We have the debt ceiling, now we have the fiscal cliff. Is there kind of a Groundhog Day aspect to this for you?
Yeah, well, I think that when we first started covering this about 6 months ago, there was this idea that January 1st was kind of this unitary deadline and we would either go off the cliff or not. It's now clear that that is not true at all. It seems like a deal is going to get struck sometime towards the end of December, before the holidays, after the holidays, we don't know. But that's really only the first deadline, then there's many after then. We're going to have the debt ceiling to deal with. It looks like there's a possibility that the House might pass the Senate bill extending the Bush tax cuts for the first $250,000 of a family's income, and then they would come back and fight it out on all of the other issues, of which there are many, 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 many.
You mentioned this possibility that it could go beyond Christmas. I mean, yeah. I think in the rest of the country, people are focused on taxes and spending. The fact is, in Washington, they're focused on it, but they're also focused on whether they get a vacation. And there's been a lot of talk lately. People have been saying, don't plan to get out of Washington. So you think there's really a chance this goes almost all the way up to the new year?
I think that there has been a lot of posturing from both sides, and that negotiations are probably further along behind closed doors than we would know. To a certain extent, that posturing is a good thing, right? If you're hearing people come out and argue with each other and say that they're walking away and whatever, it's all just the kabuki theater of how these deals get done. But no, it does seem likely that we could be there over the holidays. In the past, Washington has absolutely done this, where they get very, very close to these deadlines that they set, they go over them a little bit, and then they come back. One way or another, even if they solve this right before Christmas, we're going to have to come back in January and probably have a lot of issues to deal with.
So this isn't going to be the only cliff. We're going to have future mini cliffs. And the debt ceiling, what does that look like in 2013? We're going to have another whole fight about whether the debt ceiling is going to get raised?
Yes, so we should probably actually hit the debt ceiling pretty soon. I think that the last I had checked, we're about $65 billion below it, which is very, very close for the federal government. We don't know exactly when we'll hit it. They'll let us know. Treasury sends a letter to Congress to let them know. Once we hit it, there's a number of weeks of what they call extraordinary measures that they can take, which is basically the federal money shifts money around from pocket to pocket. But at some point, they will be faced with a very big cliff where they won't be able to pay all of their bills. That will probably come in March. And the hope from the Obama administration is that the debt ceiling will get raised as part of whatever they do in December. But Republicans have basically said, we see this as a point of leverage, and we're not going to raise it without extracting something. And so the fight that we saw last summer is, it could happen again.
You've pointed out before that this isn't a naturally occurring cliff or slope or whatever you want to call it. Politicians set this up. So why is it that they set it up? Someone must have had something to gain from doing so.
Yeah, I think that both sides think, well, I guess to start off with, the Obama administration set this up precisely to force Congress to act, to make the sequester so painful that Republicans would be moved to vote on something. And also, I think to kind of bring the debt reduction, the framework for debt reduction onto something on their own terms. But I do think that after they go over the cliff, the stakes change and the negotiating tactics will change. And maybe this is something that you can talk about, is it seems like both sides, to a certain extent, there's certainly an argument that they'll have more leverage after we go off the cliff on January 1st than before.
Yeah, I think you see some real uncertainty about who actually will have more leverage, right? Because on the one hand, as you're pointing out, these policies are much more consistent with long-term Democratic goals, right? Higher taxes to pay for Medicare and Social Security and all sorts of programs. What does he actually want to accomplish beyond sort of making the tax code more progressive? What's your sense of that?
So I think that he wants to make the tax code more progressive. This is a deeply held belief of his that income inequality has increased in the country in part because of the tax code. And I think that he thinks that middle-class families have gotten hit really hard. I also think that the White House is kind of in a defensive posture. They passed the Dodd-Frank Act, they passed the Affordable Care Act. They really want those two pieces of legislation to stand, and Republicans would be delighted to repeal both of them. Then I think the big issue that they haven't gotten to that they would like to get to is immigration reform.
So it's sort of like the battles we have are kind of medium-sized battles, as big as they seem, the fiscal cliff, immigration. But really the most important thing for Obama in the second term is simply the fact that he gets to validate his first term and put it into place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I don't think that they think that they will be able to pass anything a quarter as big as the ACA was in terms of sort of foundationally changing social safety net in our country. I think that they just want to make sure that it stays.
Yeah.